Hello, and welcome to Gendering Geopolitics, my short series where I have quick 10-minute conversations with women who are breaking barriers around the world. My name is Emily Prey, and I'm a senior analyst at the New Lines Institute in Washington, D.C. And today I am joined by Dr. Valerie M. Hudson, University Distinguished Professor at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M. Thank you so much for joining me. It's an honor to speak with you this afternoon.
I'm delighted to be here, Emily.
So today we're going to be discussing something that you've been working on recently, which is feminist foreign policy and deterrence. How is America's traditional style of deterrence masculinist, and what does this mean for national security?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that question. Professor Rose McDermott of Brown University and I have been working up a think piece about how our traditional conceptions of deterrence are based around the standard masculine threat response, which is fight or flight, and how basically that approach is you're gonna put everything into deterrence itself, and displaying power and accumulating power and standing off with the adversary to impress them that if they cross the line, you will be coming down really, really hard on them. But we argue that that's increasingly going to be a failing strategy for the United States as it goes into a period where it is not the unchallenged hegemon in the world. We believe that overemphasis on deterrence planning as the primary threat response is going to be perhaps more inadequate to meet the challenges that the U.S. would face over the next several decades.
And so, on the flip side, what does a feminist approach to deterrence and threat response look like?
Yes, what was fascinating is that the early experiments on what threat response was like in human beings, the fight or flight response, was all done with males. They did not include females. And at some point in the 1990s, someone said, what if we reran these experiments with females? What would we see? And what they saw was something very, very different. They did not see fight or flight. What they saw was what they characterized as tend and befriend. And what that meant is that women's life experience is often a case of not being able to deter aggressors. And so the female response to threat is to emphasize what we might call post-deterrence strategies and pre-deterrence strategies. That is, to try to mitigate the negative emotions coming from the perceived aggressor or adversary, try to befriend, as well as tending to the innocent and vulnerable who are under the care of women. And this is a situation that women often find themselves in. They are not able to deter the aggressor, but they must pick up the pieces and they must try to do whatever preparation they can so that when the blow comes, it will not produce the massive collateral damage that it otherwise would.
And do you think that the U.S.'s foreign policy and response to threats would be different at all if more women were in elevated positions throughout the government?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I think a lot of women buy into the conventional thinking on national security in order to actually obtain positions at the table. So it might, in fact, have to be coming from women who are not at the table, but who influence those who eventually will be at the table. That's an interesting thing in and of itself. But I really do think that one of the most important things that the U.S. can do at this particular time is to stop seeing post-deterrence planning as something that undermines deterrence. We have this funny black-white view that if we do any sort of planning for post-deterrence, then we've undermined deterrence, and that's almost literally insane. And so in the paper that Rose McDermott and I wrote, we try to show how crazy the idea that post-deterrence planning undermines deterrence has been. And so we look at nuclear strategic doctrine. We also look at the Taiwan Straits issue and so forth as examples of how this either-or thinking is really not to our benefit.
I appreciate your point that it's important to bring in women who aren't already at the table. And it's also really significant to not generalize women as this group that are all nurturing and caring and motherly figures, because that's just not true. Women are part of the system. Women are capable of violence and are not one homogenous group. So moving forward with the Biden administration in the US, Biden has the most diverse cabinet in history. He's created the White House Gender Policy Council. He has put himself on this platform of human rights and women's rights. So do you foresee this administration changing the US approach to deterrence or explicitly engaging in feminist foreign policy in any way?
Nope. Those who are in charge of what we might call the big three, the Defense Department, the State Department, and USAID, are all male. And they are all of a generation that has a very difficult time, I think, seeing some of the feminist insights that we've been talking about today, Emily. Certainly, with the case of Taiwan, we're already off onto that very traditional haka dance approach, very masculine approach to attempting to deter China from a future invasion of Taiwan. And so I don't see any movement on new kinds of thinking about nuclear deterrence as well. So I honestly think we're getting more of the same, unfortunately. I know there are many people who are maybe a level or two down from the top players in the Biden administration foreign policy who do have a different set of lenses. And I hope that over time, their insights will be listened to and incorporated. But right now, I'm not feeling very hopeful.
I think that's another important point, that it's not just a matter of bringing women to the table, it's a matter of bringing feminists to the table, whether they're men, women, whoever, and that they can have a different type of thinking and to understand how to see things outside of the system. So with this limited view, this masculinist perspective of deterrence that the US is currently engaging in and has traditionally engaged in, what are the human costs of this?
Oh, the human costs are immense. When we think, for example, let's just take the example of how for so many years, our approach to nuclear doctrine was mutual assured destruction. I mean, think about that. Mutual assured destruction. So not just destruction of the policymakers, but destruction of their entire societies in order to maintain what they call the balance of terror. I remember, well, I don't personally remember, but certainly I think the Soviet Union during its time took a very different approach to nuclear deterrence. And they honestly thought Robert McNamara, who was in a sense the author of MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction, was almost quite literally insane. He attempted to argue with them that offensive weapons were moral, but defensive weapons were immoral. And the Soviets were like, nope, we don't buy it. All right. You guys may be prepared to sacrifice your entire nation for mutual assured destruction, but we're not. We're going to try to make sure that our population survives. And of course, when Ronald Reagan came along, he had the very same view, which is why we started talking about the Strategic Defense Initiative. But certainly, I think this approach of fight or flight has led in, say, things like the Vietnam War and in other places, Mogadishu, to coming in strong, and then when you cannot prevail, you just cut and run, and you leave your allies and others who supported your cause, to face the music themselves. And so I honestly think that the human costs, the reputational costs, there's so many costs that are involved with a masculinist approach to deterrence that I think it's time to start looking at a revised idea of what optimal deterrence looks like.
It really makes one wonder how many lives could have been saved if the US didn't engage in this masculinist style of deterrence throughout the years. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for coming on Gendering Geopolitics. It was a pleasure to speak with you and to hear your perspectives on feminist foreign policy and deterrence.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.